Okay, so what we have here is a weed eater 261 riding lawnmower that a customer brought in, and the original story is that he had shredded the back tire, this one here. So, you know, easy fix, right? Take the wheel off, put a new tire on there, send it back. Well, subsequently the story got expanded, and what basically is going on here is the transmission has an issue where there's chain drive to each of these wheels through a differential, and because of some serious lack of maintenance on this thing, it's developed a transmission issue. Now, when we told the customer, you know, hey, this is going to cost a lot of money to, excuse me, to, you know, take the whole back end of this thing off and fix it, they abandoned it here. And so we ended up with this tractor. And, you know, for a while I kind of thought to myself, yeah, I'll just scrap it for parts. You know, the engine still runs, the deck's still good. You know, the whole thing works pretty good except for this transmission. This transmission, I mean, this tractor is notorious for having issues with the transmission. So, I've already had this thing apart once, you know, after we talked to the customer, you know, it sat here for a couple of weeks, and I ended up having to put it back together just to get it out of the shop. But now I got some spare time, and I'm going to fix it. Now, normally I wouldn't record this kind of stuff, but this is an interesting little failure. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the back end of it apart again, and I'm going to show you what lack of maintenance will do to a transmission, and then I'm going to fix it. Basically, it's going to require some welding and some new bearings. So it's a pretty extensive job, and I'm not going to show the whole thing, but I'll show you the interesting parts where there's a shaft that's worn and some other substantial wear that we will fix. Okay, now you can see the chain drive here. And the problem that he told us about was, oh yeah, in addition to the wheel being shredded, it's had a problem with the chain falling off. Normally there's a sprocket that goes on this shaft, and then it, you know, goes to that. So let me show you what the actual problem is here. So this is the shaft that comes from the differential, and there's usually a bearing here, but the bearing disintegrated and the shaft came down and cut a groove in this carrier plate, pretty much almost sawing it in half. And that shaft is not supposed to have a groove in it. Tremendous damage from this thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have to take the shaft out, which involves pretty much disassembling the entire transmission. And I'm going to take this part out, which is called a carrier plate, and I'm going to weld it back up. And then I'm going to have to get a new bearing, but at that point, this thing should be ready to go again. Okay, a few minutes later and the tranny's apart. It wasn't too bad, really. It's probably going to be a lot harder putting it back together, but anyways, now you can see the extent of the carnage here. That should be a round hole in this shaft. I mean, it's almost worn completely through. So what I'm going to attempt to do is clean this up and TIG weld around here and then throw it in the lathe and turn it back to the way it should be. Okay, so first thing I did here was took the differential out of here and set the shaft up in the lathe. What I got here is my bell center has a hole in the end of it that I can use kind of like as a cup center to support this end of it. So what I'm going to do is just, you know, run some emery around this thing and just clean all the crap off it so I can weld to it better. Okay. Now the next thing I'm going to do is take this out of here and get set up for welding. So I'm just using ER70S filler rod here. Alright, I think that's pretty good. Whew, it's hot. You may notice I have a rag wrapped around this thing. It's soaked in water so that the heat doesn't travel down into the differential. So we'll let that cool down, and yeah, it's probably got some pinholes in it, but it ought to be good enough. Let it cool down, put it back in the lathe, and turn it down. Okay, I got it back up in the lathe here, and we're gonna just do a little stuff here if I can avoid kicking the camera. $619, $625. Okay, that's about it. Not a bad repair. A couple of low spots, but I'm pretty sure that this is going to work just fine. So, one differential fixed. Okay, so I didn't show this on camera, but I welded in a washer on the back here. Make the hole round again for the bearing, and I got this piece here got to deal with. It's a friction drive. If you've never seen one of these things before, it's kind of like a friction clutch in the center. This is what they call the lining. This is the actual rubber disc. I have another piece of friction material here, and what happens is this goes in here like this, and then this goes in here like this, and it's kind of like a drum brake that drags, so that when you engage this thing, normally the engine is driving a wheel, and depending on how far out on the circumference of that wheel is how fast this thing goes. But when you engage it, there's a little bit of a friction drive so that it doesn't like bust stuff in the tranny. So we're going to replace this too now. You can't get this part right here, you can't get it. This is part of that thing where they say like, oh, if you got to replace this rubber wheel, which is like a high stress part, we're going to jerk you for a whole $380 transmission, which is totally asinine. So I ordered an equivalent part from Sten's, which has the inside of this is in here. It kind of almost looks like this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it on the lathe when I get it and cut this hole out in the middle. The OD and the ID are the same, so it ought to go back together. But this will be the last piece we have to do. I also ordered 2 of these bearings, because this one, as you can see, is kind of wallowed out too. This was in the beginning stages of failing. Okay, we're going to do a little fancy turning here. And I got a trepanning bit in here. And what I'm going to do is line this up on the old wheel. Now what we're going to do is put this out of here. Put the new one in. Alright. There we go. I really don't want to use any oil on this because it's all friction stuff. Slow it down even more. we almost made it all the way through. Yeah. Problem was, it's an interrupted cut. So, you know, it was right in the middle of that bolt circle, so it caught one of the edges. But, it is almost through. Alright, well, I'm not going to claim that was pretty. Not my best effort at machining, but got this out. What I ended up doing was just putting a chisel right on the line there and smacking it, and it was through far enough so that it, you know, it just came out real easy. And then I just cleaned it up with a file, cleaned that burr up a little bit with the file. So here's the old one with the pieces missing out of it, and here's the new one, and this fits in here real good. It's the way it should, and I get the flange on the back that I can do. So I'm going to put this in now, and unfortunately Mr. Brown did not bring the bearings today, so we'll only be able to put this in, and can't drive it around yet, but we'll get there. Okay, so I went and assembled this thing off camera to the throw-out bearing. So anyways, this thing goes in here like this on the tech shaft. You gotta engage the forks into the throw-out bearing. And then there's a couple bolts that go in here like this. Let's get them started in here by hand. So, you know, after working on a buttload of these riding lawnmowers, I can tell you right now that this Craftsman is a total piece of crap, really. I mean, I've never seen such a more cheaply made hunk of junk in my life. They don't even make it anymore, probably because half of them went back to the factory with like serious tranny damage. I mean, imagine building something so cheap that you don't even make spare parts for the transmission. You just say, well, you're going to need a new one. Now, the MSRP on this thing, I looked it up online, was $800. And when this friction wheel wears out, you're dropping another almost $400 to fix it. So, I mean, that really blows, you know. I mean, come on, man, give me a break. But fortunately, since this was abandoned here, okay, so you can see how this works now. Since this was abandoned here, and the actual parts that you buy to fix this can be had. I mean, you got to modify them, obviously, and you need a lathe and a mill to do that kind of stuff. But if you can do it, you can fix these things. But you know, come on, man. I mean, the way this this works is this friction wheel rides up against this plate under here, so it's going to wear out. I mean, you know, and the friction material they have in here is just heavy paper, so you know, I mean, obviously that's going to rot out too. Anyways, what's left to do on this now is affix the shaft, and that goes in here. Actually, it goes in this way. Where does this thing go? Yeah, like this. And then this chain drives this plastic sprocket, which is another total piece of crap, really. I mean, ever heard of a plastic sprocket on the chain drive? So I'm just waiting for the bearings. Once I get the bearings, I've repaired this plate, and this one's clapped out too. The other one got sawed right in half. So we'll put the new bearing in here and put this plate on like this. And then she should be good to go. Oh, it goes this way. I'm sorry. It goes like that. And then it should be good to go. So I got to put a few more parts on this shaft. There's a snap ring, and then a different kind of bearing goes on here. And then we'll just be ready for the differential bearings when they come in. Okay, so we got a new chain on this baby, and we have done our little tensioner wheel. See how that spring goes down and puts some spring force on this. So hopefully this chain will never be coming off again. Now we got to do is put it back in. Alright, we are on the final stretch of our transmission odyssey here. Mr. Brown has brought us some new bushings. And we are going to install these in here and get this thing off of my hoist so we can get to the next one, because this thing is taking up too much space. So there we go. Oh baby, yeah, that's a good one. We got some screws here. Put these in. There we go. Okay. We're going to put one over here. Now, the shaft is fixed. It is on the road. Oh yeah, she fits in there good. Put this chain on this plastic gear here. Oh, you know something? That ain't gonna fly. Because we gotta tighten that up, that thing there. What on earth was I thinking? have got this done a lot easier, a lot sooner, but I spent the day having my FAA third class medical, and that was like a priority, even though it didn't expire for a couple months. I always like to get it done a little early, just in case, you know, because the FAA, you know, the FAA is it's one of these bureaucracies, and you never know what kind of stuff they're going to pull on you, so you don't want to get grounded. So my medical expires in a couple of months, but I had to go out and take care of stuff so I could keep flying. Come on, baby, you know you want to go on there. Oh yeah, you did. And then we're gonna put this little whiz wheel thing in. Oh yeah, she all ready now. Here we go. And then we're gonna tighten up this one now. All right, I think we're ready to put this transmission back in this tractor. Get these chains on and be done with this project. This thing has just been taking up so much space. And I had it in here once and took it all apart, and we found this problem. Guy left it. So to put it all back together and wait for parts. But we got it now. Alright, I'm going to just put this thing back together, and hopefully the next time you see me I'll be riding it.